Welcome to Terrormouth, where the night doesn't just hold secrets, it remembers them. Story 1. The Lantern in Black Hollow. It was a crisp autumn evening when Mark Rivers, an investigative journalist known for chasing urban legends, arrived in Black Hollow, a town so isolated that it barely appeared on maps. Nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills, it was surrounded by dense forest so thick that even daylight seemed muted under the canopy. The locals were few, mostly older residents who eyed strangers with suspicion. They spoke in hushed tones of disappearances and strange sightings, of nights when the forest itself seemed alive. Mark checked into the only inn, a creaking wooden building with peeling paint and a fireplace that smelled faintly of mold. Over a lukewarm cup of coffee, he spoke to the bartender, a wiry man named Earl, who leaned close. "You don't want to wander after dark. Not here, the Hollow. It takes those who follow the light." Mark smiled politely, hiding his unease. A skeptic at heart, he dismissed it as local superstition. But curiosity gnawed at him. That night, he drove his car to the edge of the forest, parking near the old logging trail that had been the center of many disappearances. He grabbed his flashlight, notebook, and voice recorder and stepped into the shadows. The forest was unnaturally quiet, not a single bird or rustle of animal life, only the crunch of leaves under his boots. Then he saw it, a lantern, orange and swaying, moving slowly along the trail. It floated as if carried by an unseen hand, cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Mark froze, instinct telling him to run, but professional curiosity forced him to step forward as he followed. The lantern seemed to anticipate his movements, weaving around trees, retreating when he hurried, advancing when he slowed. The shadows cast by the branches twisted unnaturally, elongating and contorting into shapes that seemed to watch him. The air grew colder, dense, almost tangible, pressing against his chest. A whisper carried on the wind. "Mark, Mark, come closer." He spun around. Nothing. Just the forest, silent and vast. Another step forward, and the whisper came again, closer this time, as if someone or something was right beside him. The trail opened into a clearing. The lantern floated in the center, pulsing with light. Mark's flashlight flickered. Around the edges of the clearing, tall, thin figures emerged from the darkness. Their faces were featureless, smooth as porcelain, eyes empty voids that seemed to reflect his fear back at him. They didn't move like humans. They glided silently, limbs bending in impossible angles. Mark's pulse raced. The lantern bobbed once, then darted toward the far edge of the clearing, stopping suddenly. From the shadows, a woman emerged, hollow eyes, mouth frozen in a silent scream, her skin pale, almost translucent, as though she had been drained of life. She pointed at him, and the lantern's glow intensified, casting the surrounding forest into stark, unnatural light. Mark stepped back, tripping over a root. The forest responded. The ground seemed to shift, softening, almost breathing beneath his feet. Leaves rose into the air, swirling in spirals as if caught in a wind that existed only around him. The figures moved closer, surrounding him. A low hum filled his ears, vibrating through his bones, while the whispering chorus of voices layered together, calling, chanting, screaming his name. The woman moved toward him, gliding faster than possible. Mark ran, stumbling through the twisted undergrowth, but the path behind him seemed to stretch endlessly. Every tree he passed warped, branches bending toward him like grasping hands. The lantern bobbed ahead, always just out of reach, pulsing in rhythm with his panicked heartbeat. Finally, he tripped and fell in the clearing again. The faceless figures formed a circle around him. The air was thick, almost solid, filled with the whispering, "Stay, stay, never leave. Join us." The woman's hand reached out, impossibly long, and the shadows inside the clearing surged forward. The lantern's light exploded, blinding, and Mark felt himself lifted off the ground, as if invisible hands were pulling him toward the center. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light vanished. The figures dissolved into mist, the forest returned to its normal, silent state, and the path to his car lay open once more. Mark scrambled to his feet, heart pounding, mind reeling, glancing back into the trees. A faint glow lingered, pulsing softly. And he heard it again, a whisper carried by the wind. "We will wait." Mark ran without looking back, but deep down he knew Black Hollow had marked him. That lantern, that forest, would not let him go. Not truly. Mark ran blindly through the forest, branches clawing at his jacket, leaves slicing his face. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, and the fog seemed alive, curling around his legs like a living thing. Behind him, faint whispers returned, growing louder, chanting his name with thousands of layered voices that made his skull ache. The path he had come down had vanished. Every direction looked the same: twisting trees, thick fog, the faint orange glow of the lantern bobbing in the distance. He tried to call for help, but his voice was swallowed by the forest. Each breath came ragged, sharp, and cold as frost. The shadows themselves seemed to stretch toward him, bending and snapping as though they were alive. Then he saw them, the figures, hundreds now, faceless, featureless, gliding silently above the ground, surrounding him. They weren't human. They moved without sound, their elongated limbs twisting unnaturally. In the center, the woman appeared again, pale, hollow-eyed, mouth frozen in a silent scream. She pointed at him, and the lantern pulsed violently, casting the clearing in stark, unearthly light. The ground beneath him shifted. It was soft, almost liquid, as if the forest itself were swallowing him. The faceless figures closed in, and Mark's hands scraped at the soil, trying to pull himself away. The whispers became a deafening chorus. "Stay, belong, join us forever." Suddenly, the lantern surged toward him. Its light filled his vision, and the forest melted away. He was suspended in a void place, without sky, without trees, without sound except for the humming, vibrating whispers. Time lost all meaning. Mark felt his body stretch, twist, and dissolve, consciousness slipping away into the void. Then he saw glimpses of others' faces, of travelers lost decades ago, trapped in the same place, their eyes empty, mouths silently screaming. He realized the lantern wasn't just light, it was a beacon, a lure to pull the living into this liminal space, feeding the forest's hunger. Mark's mind screamed for escape, but the void was patient, inexorable. The woman's hollow eyes met his, and he understood. Willow Creek's lantern had claimed him, just as it had claimed every other soul foolish enough to follow it. Then, abruptly, the void released him. The forest returned. Black Hollow lay silent under the pale moonlight. Mark collapsed on the forest floor, gasping, his heart hammering. The path back to his car appeared normal, familiar. The fog had thinned. The whispers faded to nothing. He ran the final stretch to his car, hands shaking, mind racing. Behind him, just at the edge of the trees. The lantern flickered faintly once more, and the same soft, chilling whisper reached him. "We will wait for the next one." Mark drove away, never looking back. But deep down, he knew the forest had marked him. Black Hollow had not released him completely. The shadows, the whispers, and the lantern would follow, patiently waiting for the moment he faltered. The moment curiosity drew him back to the edge of the forest. Somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind, the faintest echo of his own voice joined the whispers, distant, warning and welcoming at the same time. "Don't follow, or you'll stay." Story to the vanishing cabin on Hollow Creek Road. It was nearing midnight when Sarah Miller, a traveling nurse returning from a late shift, found herself on Hollow Creek Road, a narrow, winding route through the Appalachian Hills. The town she had just passed was nearly deserted, save for a few flickering streetlights that barely cut through the thick fog. Hollow Creek Road was notorious among locals, whispered about in diners and gas stations, stories of cars vanishing, strange lights appearing, and a small, abandoned cabin that seemed to shift location each time someone claimed to have seen it. Sarah's car headlights caught something in the distance, a dim, warm glow along the side of the road. At first, she thought it was another vehicle, but as she drew closer, she realized it was a cabin, small and weathered, with smoke curling lazily from a crooked chimney. The eerie part, she had never seen this cabin on the map, and she had driven this road dozens of times. Her curiosity overrode caution. She parked and stepped out, the fog pressing cold against her skin. The air smelled faintly of burning wood and something else, something metallic and sharp that made her stomach churn. The front door was cracked open. Inside, a faint flicker of candlelight illuminated dust-covered furniture and peeling wallpaper. But the air was unnervingly still. Sarah stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under her weight, echoing far too loudly in the silent cabin. On the mantel was a photograph, yellowed with age, of a family she did not recognize. But as she peered closer, she saw herself in the background of the image, standing exactly where she was now. A chill ran down her spine. She stepped back, tripping slightly over a rug, and suddenly heard it a whisper, low and rasping, coming from the attic above. "You shouldn't be here." Heart racing, she climbed the narrow staircase. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as though the cabin itself resisted her ascent. The attic door was closed, but a faint glow seeped through the cracks. She placed her hand on the doorknob. It was ice. The whisper came again, louder. "Turn back. Leave, now." Summoning courage, Sarah pushed the door open. The attic was empty, save for a single rocking chair moving gently back and forth, as if someone had just vacated it. The candlelight flickered violently, and then she noticed it handprints, smudged and dark, appearing on the walls around her, as if some unseen presence had walked along them, circling her. The door slammed shut behind her. Panic set in. She tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Then she heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, descending the staircase. Only, the floor below was empty. The cabin groaned and warped, walls bending unnaturally, windows stretching wider, revealing a forest that wasn't there before, dark and endless. The whispering turned into a chorus. Hundreds of voices overlapping, calling names, pleading, screaming. The photograph on the mantel seemed to change before her eyes. The family now had dozens of ghostly figures surrounding them, all featureless, all looking directly at her. Her own reflection appeared in every window, distorted, pale, screaming silently. Sarah tried to run to the front door, but the cabin's interior stretched impossibly, corridors lengthening and twisting. The glowing windows pulsed like eyes, and she realized with mounting terror that the cabin was alive. It had a hunger. It wanted her inside. And then she saw it at the far end of the warped living room. A shadowy figure, tall and thin, faceless, gliding toward her, hand outstretched. The candlelight flickered once more, and in that brief illumination, she recognized herself in the figure. She screamed. The cabin responded. The walls bent inward, the floorboards trembling, and the air grew thick, almost solid. The whispering crescendoed. "You belong. You will stay." Sarah stumbled back, bracing herself against a warped wall. Her flashlight flickered. Outside, the fog thickened on Hollow Creek Road, swallowing the cabin entirely from view. The road became silent again, as if nothing had ever been there. Sarah's scream echoed through the warped corridors of the cabin, but there was no one to hear it. The air thickened, almost suffocating, as if the house itself pressed in on her. Every wall, every piece of furniture seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. The windows pulsed like living eyes, reflecting a forest that shouldn't exist. Black, endless. The whispering voices intensified, layered and overlapping, calling her name, accusing her, pleading with her all at once, desperate. Sarah ran down a hallway that seemed to stretch on forever, each step heavier than the last. Shadows clung to her, stretching across the walls and floor, elongating her own figure until it became unrecognizable. The candlelight flickered violently, revealing shapes, dozens of faceless figures circling at the edges of her vision. Always just out of reach, she reached the front door and yanked at it. It didn't budge. The knob was ice cold, and the wood seemed to pulse under her hands. She screamed again, pounding on it, but the cabin's walls vibrated in response, almost alive. The photograph on the mantel had changed once more. Dozens of ghostly figures now surrounded the family, and at the center, she saw her own face, pale and wide-eyed, screaming silently. Trapped in the image, the shadowy figure from the attic emerged from the hallway. Faceless, impossibly tall, limbs bending at unnatural angles, it glided toward her. She stumbled backward, tripping over a warped floorboard. The air pulsed with whispers. "You belong. You will stay. Forever." In a moment of desperate clarity, Sarah remembered the stories she had overheard in town, how the cabin lured travelers, feeding off their fear, trapping their souls in an endless loop. With shaking hands, she grabbed a chair and threw it against the nearest window. Glass shattered, but instead of escaping, she found herself looking into another version of the cabin, another distorted room layered over the first. The cabin's interior had folded in on itself. There was no exit. Panic set in fully. The floor beneath her feet softened, sucking her down slightly as if the house itself was consuming her. The whispering became a roar, a chorus of voices, hundreds, maybe thousands, all trapped within the cabin's walls. Sarah's own voice joined the chorus, distant, echoing, a warning she could barely comprehend. "Don't come here. Stay away." She spun around and ran, the shadow gliding silently behind her. She ducked into another corridor, only to find herself in a small attic again, the rocking chair swaying. Candlelight illuminated dozens of handprints appearing and disappearing on the walls, like invisible hands pressing against reality. The figure reached out, and in a flash, she saw her own body reflected in the rocking chair, empty, lifeless, yet moving with the house. Sarah screamed and ran blindly, the cabin folding and stretching around her. Time no longer made sense. Seconds felt like hours. Moments stretched into eternities. Finally, she stumbled through a warped hallway and burst through a door into a cold, foggy night. She was on Hollow Creek Road, but the cabin was nowhere in sight. Her car was parked just ahead, fog curling around its headlights. She jumped in and locked the doors, heart hammering, shaking uncontrollably. The road ahead seemed clear, normal. For a moment, she thought she had escaped. Then, at the edge of the fog, she saw it. The faint glow of the lantern inside the cabin, or at least, where the cabin should have been. A whisper, soft but chilling, drifted across the fog. "We will wait for the next one." Sarah's hands gripped the wheel. She sped down Hollow Creek Road, never looking back. But deep in her mind, she knew the truth. The cabin had left its mark. Its hunger lingered in her thoughts, in the pulse of her own fear. Every creak in the car, every shadow across the road, felt like the cabin following her. Weeks later, when she tried to describe what happened to the locals, they exchanged knowing glances. "It takes only once," one said softly, "and it never really lets go." Sarah never drove Hollow Creek Road again, but sometimes, when the fog is thick and the night is silent, she swears she can see the glow of that vanishing cabin in the distance, waiting patiently, calling her name, promising that one day, curiosity or fear will lead her back. Story 3, The Hollow Bridge Apparition. It was a stormy November night when David Harris, a local journalist, decided to drive along Rookridge Lane, a secluded road that wound through the hills of an isolated small town. The townsfolk avoided this route after dark. Old stories told of people vanishing, vehicles stalling, and shadowy figures appearing on the infamous hollow. Bridger Bridge, so ancient it groaned with every gust of wind. David was skeptical. As he navigated the winding road, rain pounding against his windshield, he noticed something strange. His headlights revealed a figure standing at the center of the bridge, completely still despite the torrent of rain and wind. A young woman, pale and drenched, her long hair plastered to her face, staring directly at him. Instinctively, he slowed the car, fogging up from the warmth inside the vehicle, trying to get a clearer look. The figure didn't move, yet the air seemed to vibrate around her. Something about her was wrong. Her eyes were too dark, reflecting no light, almost as if they were voids. David called out, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. He stepped out into the rain, flashlight trembling in his hands. His boots sank slightly into the slick pavement as he approached. The closer he got, the more he felt an oppressive chill, like the warmth of life was being drawn from him. Suddenly, the wind shifted, carrying a low, guttural whisper, "Go. Don't cross." David froze, scanning the bridge. There was no one else, just the pale figure. His rational mind fought panic. "It's just a person in distress," he told himself. Yet the instinct to flee clawed at his spine. He stepped closer, and the figure's head tilted unnaturally, the motion jerky, almost mechanical. The whispers grew louder, layered hundreds of voices overlapping, indecipherable but urgent. His flashlight flickered, and when it came back, the figure was gone. David's heart pounded. He spun around, and in the reflection of his windshield, he saw dozens of pale faces staring at him from the sides of the bridge, featureless, their mouths moving in silent screams. Panic surged. He ran back to his car, fumbling with the keys, when he noticed a single black rose placed in the center of the windshield. Confused, he grabbed it, and the rain around him thickened unnaturally, the bridge creaking like it was alive. From the shadows, the whispers became words he could finally hear. "You shouldn't have come here. Now you belong." A sudden shadow darted across the bridge behind him. When David turned, a woman taller, faceless, dripping wet stood at the far end, motionless. The storm intensified. His car engine sputtered and died, headlights flickering. His cell phone had no signal. He was alone, trapped, and the hollow bridge seemed to stretch, elongating in impossible ways, the shadows writhing, reaching for him. The air thickened. Each breath became a struggle. The black rose in his hand pulsed cold, almost like a heartbeat. David realized then that the bridge had a hunger, a pull stronger than gravity, stronger than fear itself. And the pale figure wasn't alone. Hundreds of shadowy forms began emerging from the darkened sides, floating above the rain-slicked bridge, circling him silently. David backed up, heart hammering, trying to get into the car. A sudden, guttural screech echoed across the bridge, and the pale figure stepped toward him, then stopped mid-air, hovering, impossible. Her eyes, voids of darkness, bore into him. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. "You cannot leave." And then, in a moment of dizzying terror, the bridge shifted. The shadows disappeared, the rain ceased, and David was alone. The pale figure, the floating faces, the whispering chorus all gone. The only evidence of what had just happened was the black rose still in his hand. Now wilted and cold, David sped away, hands shaking, every nerve on edge. Behind him, the hollow bridge lay silent under a moonlit sky, as if nothing had happened. Yet he knew, deep in his gut, that the bridge had not let him go. It had marked him, and one day it would call him back. David's hands were still trembling as he gripped the steering wheel, eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Hollow Bridge had vanished behind the fog, yet the memory of the shadows and the faceless figure lingered like ice in his veins. He tried to convince himself it was a hallucination, the storm, exhaustion, and the long hours of work, but the black rose on the passenger seat, cold and wilted, refused to lie. The drive through the narrow country roads felt endless. Every creak of the car, every whisper of wind through the trees, made his pulse spike. Then, in a side mirror, he saw it, a pale figure standing at the edge of the road, staring silently. He blinked, and she was gone. His rational mind screamed, "There's no one there," but instinct said otherwise. That night, at the small motel he had stopped at, he could not sleep. Every shadow in the dim room seemed to move independently. The black rose lay on the nightstand, pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. David tried to ignore it, but a sudden knocking came at the window. Heavy, deliberate. He froze. Outside, fog swirled unnaturally, forming shapes, dozens of faceless figures pressing against the glass. David grabbed the rose, clutching it as if it were a lifeline. The whispers began again, low and urgent, threading through his skull. "You belong. The bridge calls. You cannot escape." Over the next few days, the supernatural presence intensified. He would see the bridge in reflections, puddles, windows, even the darkened screen of his phone. At work, the lights would flicker, shadows stretching unnaturally across hallways, whispers threading into conversations he wasn't having. The hollow bridge had followed him. One night, he received a package, no return address. Inside was a tiny, charred model of the bridge, complete with miniature, shadowy figures hovering above it, and a single black rose frozen in resin. A note scrawled in an impossible, jagged hand read, "We are waiting." David realized with sinking horror that the bridge wasn't just a location, it was a sentient entity, feeding on fear, marking those who had dared approach it. It could bend space, time, even perception. Anyone who saw it risked vanishing entirely, their essence consumed and trapped to join the chorus of lost souls. Weeks later, despite his precautions, he began to notice subtle changes in himself. His reflection seemed hollowed, darker around the eyes, and at night, his dreams were filled with the bridge stretching endlessly. Faceless figures circling, whispers calling his name. He tried to warn others, but the stories sounded like urban legend, and the locals avoided the topic. David's warnings were dismissed as paranoia. Then, on a stormy night, the inevitable happened. Driving along a back road, he saw the glow in the distance, the familiar, impossible light of Hollow Bridge. The road twisted and stretched as it had that night before. He tried to turn, but the car refused, as if the bridge itself gripped him. Pulling him closer, the faceless figures appeared along the edges of the road, circling, gliding silently. The pale woman stood at the center, motionless, voided eyes fixed on him. He tried to scream, but no sound came. The whispers crescendoed. "You belong. Forever." David's last thought, as the bridge's shadows consumed the car and stretched reality itself, was of the black rose pulsing in his hand. Then darkness. The next morning, locals found an empty car at the edge of the foggy road. No trace of David remained, save for a black rose lying atop the dashboard. Hollow Bridge had claimed another soul, and somewhere, just beyond the fog, it waited, patient, for the next traveler who would dare to approach. Story for the silent train of Black Hollow. It was past midnight when Marcus Thompson, a young photographer and urban explorer, arrived at the abandoned Black Hollow railway station. The town's elders had warned outsiders. The tracks had been out of use for decades. Yet strange lights and sounds were sometimes reported, an unmarked train appearing on moonless nights, moving silently, stopping without warning, and vanishing just as mysteriously. Locals called it the silent train. Marcus didn't believe in ghost stories. He wanted photos, proof that the station was simply a relic of rusting rails and broken timetables. Fog rolled off the surrounding hills, curling across the cracked platform, and an icy wind cut through his jacket. He set up his camera, tripod shaking slightly as he tried to capture the eerie beauty of the deserted station. Minutes passed, silence oppressive and thick. Then a faint, metallic groan echoed along the tracks. Marcus froze. The sound was distant at first, but growing louder. A light appeared at the far end of the tracks, dim, amber, almost unnatural. The train materialized out of the fog like a phantom. Its engine emitted no smoke, no sound, yet the vibration beneath the platform hinted at immense weight. Marcus raised his camera and snapped a picture. The flash illuminated the train's windows, dark, empty, but shadows moved within, faces blurry and expressionless, peering out from behind the glass. Though the train had been abandoned for decades, curiosity overcame him. Marcus stepped closer, camera in hand. The fog thickened, swirling unnaturally, as if alive. The whistle blew not, a sound, but a low, resonating hum that vibrated directly in his chest. He felt compelled to move forward, toward the first carriage. As he approached, The doors slid open silently, revealing an interior that should have been empty. Instead, rows of wooden benches were filled with passengers in early 1900s attire, men, women, and children, faces pale and hollow, eyes wide with terror or perhaps eternal despair. They didn't move, didn't acknowledge him, yet he felt their attention, like invisible hands pressing against his mind. A voice, soft and insistent, whispered from somewhere deep in the train, "Join us. Forever." Marcus's skin crawled, but before he could retreat, the train jolted forward, gliding over the tracks, faster than physics should allow. The fog outside stretched and warped. Marcus stumbled, camera swinging wildly. He tried to step back onto the platform, only to find the ground behind him gone, replaced by an endless void of mist. The train's interior seemed to expand impossibly, corridors bending, benches shifting. Shadows crawled along the walls, faces pressed against the wood and glass. The passengers' lips moved in silent murmurs, chanting something indecipherable. Panic gripped him. He realized he could not turn back. The train was moving, and he was trapped. Every attempt to open the doors failed. They became solid walls. The whispers grew louder, now hundreds of voices overlapping. As the train carried him farther into the night, at the far end of the carriage, a figure emerged from the mist stall, faceless, draped in a tattered conductor's uniform. Its presence radiated cold, a void that seemed to suck away warmth and hope. Marcus froze, realizing the stories were true. The silent train didn't just appear, it consumed. Those who boarded were never meant to leave. Marcus raised his camera one last time, snapping a flash that lit up the entire carriage. In the photo, the passengers' faces twisted grotesquely, eyes black voids, mouths open in silent screams. As the conductor reached for him, the train lunged forward into the fog. Marcus felt himself being pulled along, drawn into the endless shadowed interior, the whispers chanting his name. Outside, the black hollow station remained empty, silent, the fog curling across the rails as if nothing had ever occurred. Marcus's heart pounded as the train hurtled through the thick, natural fog. The interior of the car twisted and stretched impossibly. Benches warped, walls seemed to breathe, and the rows of ghostly passengers multiplied, appearing and disappearing at random. Their hollow eyes followed him relentlessly, their lips moving in silent chants, as if the train itself were alive. He stumbled down the aisle, camera swinging, trying to find an exit. Every door led to another car, identical yet subtly more distorted. The shadows inside, now taller, sharper, claw-like. The whispers intensified, layering into a deafening chorus that invaded his mind, repeating one chilling command: "Stay. Forever." Marcus turned a corner and found a massive mirror covering the end wall. His reflection stared back, but it wasn't quite him. His eyes were hollow voids, his face paler, twisted in silent terror. Behind him, dozens of shadowy hands pressed against the glass, reaching for him from within the mirror. Panic surged. He tried to break it, but the mirror rippled like liquid, absorbing the force of his strikes. The conductor appeared again, gliding across the floor without sound, faceless and imposing. It raised one skeletal hand toward Marcus. The floor beneath him warped, splitting into black smoke, sucking him toward the endless void beyond the rails. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, each voice layering over the other in maddening, unintelligible harmony. Marcus knew then that escape was impossible. The train didn't just trap bodies. It trapped souls, bending time and space, feeding on terror. His camera slipped from his hands, falling into the void below, and in that instant, the entire train seemed to tilt, as if moving into another dimension. The passengers' faces shifted grotesquely, some smiling, some screaming, all silent. Suddenly, the train halted. Marcus was thrown against a wall, gasping. Outside the window, he glimpsed the black hollow station, but warped, distorted, appearing endless, like a looping nightmare. The fog outside was thick and impenetrable, and the station seemed to stretch infinitely, doors and platforms multiplying. Every shadow moved independently, reaching for him. Desperate, Marcus ran to the nearest door and flung it open. He expected to see the platform, to escape, but the door opened into another identical carriage. Another row of pale, hollow-eyed passengers stared at him, hands outstretched, whispering, "Join us," in voices that sounded like cracking ice. Time fractured. Marcus no longer knew if minutes, hours, or days had passed. He tried shouting, pounding on the walls, but the train responded only with the echoing laughter of hundreds of unseen mouths. The conductor appeared in every car simultaneously, faceless and infinite, guiding Marcus deeper into the dark heart of the train. And then he saw it. A single, empty doorway at the very end of the last carriage, lights spilling out, warm and golden, unlike anything inside the train. Hope surged. Marcus ran. He felt the shadows clawing at him, whispers screaming his name, the passengers reaching for him with impossible speed, just as his hand touched the doorframe. The train shuddered violently. The light flickered and vanished. The door became solid wall. The whispering grew into a roar, and the faceless conductor loomed over him, taller than the ceiling, a void that consumed all light. Marcus screamed, a sound swallowed by the infinite train. Morning came, but not for Marcus. Outside, the black hollow station appeared normal, abandoned, and silent. Locals would later tell police they found a camera on the tracks, soaked and broken, showing hundreds of blurred photos of the train interior passengers frozen in mid-scream, shadowy hands pressing through walls, and a single frame with Marcus's terrified face, eyes hollowed and mouth silent. No body was ever recovered. The tracks remained empty. Yet every few months, on moonless nights, the whistle of the silent train echoes through the hills of Black Hollow. The locals whisper, the train waits, hungry, patient, and anyone who dares photograph it may join the endless procession of lost souls. Forever. Story 5. The Silent Passenger of Hollow Ridge Road. Hollow Ridge Road was a lonely stretch that wound through dense forests, miles from the nearest town. Only locals knew its shortcuts, and fewer still dared to drive it after sunset. Rumors had spread for decades of a shadowy figure hitchhiking in the dead of night, a passenger who never spoke, whose presence brought terror to anyone who dared pick them up. They called it the Silent Passenger. Cameron Hayes, a freelance journalist with a taste for the obscure and eerie, decided he would finally document the truth. He arrived at Hollow Ridge at dusk, his car headlights slicing through a growing mist. The wind whispered through the tall pines, carrying a damp, earthy scent. He parked at the roadside turnout, camera and notebook ready, and waited for nightfall. The first hours passed quietly. Only the occasional deer crossed the road, and the occasional distant howl of an unknown animal. Cameron doubted the legends were real. Ghost stories for lonely truckers, he muttered to himself. Then, as the fog thickened and the moon hid behind clouds, he saw a figure. At first, it seemed just a shadow, a silhouette standing beside the road. Cameron's breath caught. The figure was impossibly still, even as the mist curled around it, almost bending the fog to its shape. It raised a hand, thumb out. Cameron's instincts screamed to drive past, but curiosity and the desire for a story won. He rolled the window down and slowed the car. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice tentative. The figure stepped closer, and Cameron froze. The passenger was a young woman, or appeared to be. Her hair hung limp, damp with the mist, and her eyes were obscured by shadows. She didn't speak. She didn't even move her lips. She simply opened the door and slid silently into the back seat. Cameron swallowed. Where to? Still no answer. Only silence. The air inside the car grew colder. His breath fogged in front of him. He glanced in the rearview mirror. The woman's face was partially visible, now pale, almost translucent, with dark shadows around her eyes. She stared straight ahead, unmoving, her expression blank. "Are you okay?" he asked. No response. He felt a chill crawl along his spine. The road stretched endlessly into the fog, and every mile marker seemed to vanish behind him as he drove. The trees pressed closer to the asphalt, as if the forest itself was alive. Suddenly, a thud from the back seat. Cameron's heart jumped. He glanced at the mirror again. The woman's eyes were now entirely black. Her lips parted slightly, revealing teeth sharper than normal, glinting faintly in the dim car light. He slammed the brakes, but the car wouldn't stop immediately. It felt as if some unseen force was holding it on the road. Panic surged. He turned to the back seat, but the woman was gone. The seat was empty. He spun around, heart hammering, and the fog outside had thickened into an impenetrable wall. He couldn't see the road, the trees, nothing but swirling grey mist. A whisper echoed in the car, not through his ears, but inside his mind. "Drive faster. Don't stop." Cameron tried to start the engine, but the car sputtered. Every attempt to accelerate failed. Then the whisper grew louder, more insistent, filling his skull with cold, icy dread. The steering wheel jerked in his hands. The headlights flickered, revealing movement. Hundreds of shadowy figures, twisted and indistinct, seemed to swirl outside the car, their forms pressing against the mist. He slammed the car into reverse, desperate to escape. The forest around him twisted, branches reaching like clawed hands. The figures followed, their whispers now voices, screaming in a language Cameron could barely comprehend, yet understood in every fiber of his being. "Join us." The car skidded to a stop. Cameron was trapped. He looked in the rearview mirror, and the silent passenger had returned. Her black eyes bore into him, her mouth moving as if speaking, but no sound came. Yet every word echoed inside his mind, forever. Cameron's hands shook. He tried the door handle, it wouldn't open. The whispering voices grew louder, now outside the car as well, surrounding him in the mist. Shadows reached through the windows, scraping at the glass. He pounded the dashboard, screamed for help, but no one could hear him. Hollow Ridge Road was empty. No town, no other cars, no light. Just the fog, the shadows, and her. Then, as suddenly as it began, the mist parted slightly. The car was moving again, sliding down the road at an impossible speed. Cameron saw glimpses of the trees, distorted and warped, faces pressed into the bark, screaming silently. The road bent in impossible angles, turning back on itself, stretching into infinity. The silent passenger, leaned forward now, her black eyes boring into him. Cameron felt his mind twist under her gaze, memories of his life dissolving into static. He could feel himself becoming part of the road, part of the fog, a shadow in the endless forest. And then, a faint glimmer of light. A small, rustic cabin appeared on the roadside, windows glowing warmly. The fog receded just enough for Cameron to aim for it. He slammed on the brakes, tires screeching, and the car lurched to a halt in the dirt driveway. Inside the cabin, an elderly man appeared, holding a lantern. His eyes were kind, but wary. "You shouldn't have come here," he said quietly. "Hollow Ridge doesn't let go of its travelers. Not easily." The silent passenger's figure hovered outside the car, fading into the fog. Cameron exhaled shakily, unsure if she had left or was merely waiting for him to step back onto the road. He left the cabin at first light, trembling, vowing never to return. Yet even miles away, in the city, the memories lingered. Sometimes at night, he could feel the presence in the back seat against the icy cold. The whispering and those hollow, black eyes staring into him, waiting for him to return to Hollow Ridge Road, Cameron. Hayes thought leaving Hollow Ridge Road behind would end the nightmare. But some horrors don't stay in one place. Weeks passed in a haze of sleepless nights. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, the silent passenger, her hollow black eyes, her twisted smile. Whispering his name from the darkness of the back seat he could no longer forget. He tried to write the story, to turn it into a warning, but the words never came out right. The photographs he had taken on Hollow Ridge had gone blank. Except for one faint image, her outline, barely visible, eyes like voids, and the fog coiling around her like smoke. Friends and family dismissed his frantic recounting as stress or obsession. But Cameron knew the truth. She was real, and she had followed him. One rainy night, he felt the presence again. Driving home from the city, the rearview mirror reflected a shadow where none should be. The back seat appeared to ripple, as if the air itself were bending. Cameron's hands gripped the wheel, and panic rose in his throat. A whisper curled around his mind. "The road is never finished. Neither are you." He slammed the brakes, and the world seemed to stretch unnaturally. The rain outside warped, turning the windshield into a swirling mirror of fog and shadow. And then he saw her, seated silently behind him, impossibly still. Her eyes were black, endless, staring directly into his soul. The car doors locked themselves. The engine died. Cameron tried to call for help, but the phone slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor, leaving only a distorted reflection of the back seat in the screen. The fog outside thickened, and through the rain-smeared glass, shapes began to emerge. Dozens of figures, twisted and faceless, crawling along the road like smoke made solid. The trees pressed in from both sides, their branches clawing at the car, leaving scratches that burned his skin without touch. Cameron remembered the old man's warning at the cabin. Hollow Ridge doesn't let go of its travelers. Not easily. He understood now this wasn't just a road. It was a threshold, a place where the world of the living and something older, hungering, overlapped. The silent passenger was its guardian, its law, and its judge. Desperation overcame fear. He threw open the door, but the car didn't move. He stumbled into the rain, the shadows immediately converging around him. They didn't touch at first, but the air vibrated with their intent. Whispers turned into voices, screaming and singing at once, telling tales of countless travelers who had vanished, their spirits now part of the fog, part of the road, from the mist. The silent passenger moved forward, gliding over the slick asphalt as if weightless. Her hollow eyes bore into him, and Cameron felt his mind fraying. Memories of his childhood, his friends, the warmth of family, all twisted into nightmarish visions. The whispering voices clawed at his thoughts, and in the distance, he saw what the road wanted him to see. A mirror of Hollow Ridge Road stretching infinitely, lined with figures just like her, all waiting, all silent. He ran. Every step through the rain-soaked asphalt felt heavier, as though the road itself resisted him. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the fog, and he glimpsed them clearly, dozens of travelers, forever trapped, wandering the mist, faces frozen in terror. They reached for him with hands like black smoke, dragging at his heels. A flash of insight, the old man's lantern. Cameron had seen it that first night, the small warm glow in the cabin that had offered a path through the fog. He searched desperately, and in the distance, through sheets of rain, a dim orange light appeared. With every ounce of strength, he ran toward it, slipping and sliding, branches lashing at him. The fog reached out, tendrils of cold, wet air curling around his arms and legs. But he pressed forward, drawn by the light that promised escape. The lantern man, the old man of the cabin, stood at the edge of the forest, holding the glow high. "Now," he shouted. Cameron lunged toward him, diving through the circle of light. The world shivered violently. The silent passenger shrieked not with sound, but inside Cameron's mind and the shadows recoiled, writhing and screeching, dissolving into the mist. The road straightened, the trees retreating, and for the first time in hours, Cameron could breathe. He collapsed beside the lantern, shivering, soaked, and gasping. The old man's eyes held a warning. "You're lucky tonight, but Hollow Ridge never forgets. She watches, and she waits." Cameron left Hollow Ridge at dawn, driving straight through the night. The fog lifted completely, the road ordinary now, empty and silent. Yet even as he returned to the city, the memory of those hollow eyes, the cold whispers, and the fog-bound shadows haunted him. At every intersection, every dark road, he swore he felt her presence, waiting, silent, patient. He never returned to Hollow Ridge Road, but he documented everything he could, the stories, the photos, the whispered warnings. He sent them to newspapers, posted them online, and told anyone who would listen. Some believed. Most dismissed him as paranoid. But Cameron knew the truth. The silent passenger was real. And Hollow Ridge Road, it was alive. And one day, if you're not careful, it will reach out for you too. Even now, when the wind blows through the trees outside his apartment, Cameron swears he hears the faintest whisper. The road is never finished. Story 6. The Whispering Bridge of Black Hollow. The Black Hollow Bridge had always been the center of whispered warnings in Millersfield, a nearly abandoned town cradled by dark pine forests and fog-choked valleys. The bridge spanned a river that seemed unnaturally black, moving slow, almost viscous. Stories circulated of travelers who had crossed the bridge at night, only to vanish or return, forever changed. The locals called it the Whispering Bridge for a reason. Some claimed it spoke, luring people into the river with voices that mimicked their loved ones. One chilly October evening, Sarah Langley, a folklorist and amateur paranormal investigator, decided she would uncover the truth. She arrived at Millersfield just as dusk swallowed the town in grey shadows. The few remaining residents eyed her suspiciously, warning her not to cross the bridge after dark. "It's just an old legend," Sarah muttered, ignoring the warnings. She carried only a backpack with a camera, flashlight, and a voice recorder, determined to capture any supernatural activity. As night fell, the forest around her seemed to grow alive. Fog rolled down from the hills, curling along the road and riverbanks, swallowing the sound of her car engine. She parked at the edge of the bridge, the wooden planks creaking under the weight of years, and stepped out. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not just quiet, the oppressive kind that felt like it pressed against her chest, smothering every heartbeat. The river beneath the bridge was still and black, reflecting nothing. Not even the faint glow of the moon hidden behind clouds. She set up her camera, aiming it at the center of the bridge, and activated the recorder. Then she heard it. At first, she thought it was the wind, a faint whisper, barely audible, like someone calling her name. Sarah, her pulse quickened. She shook her head. It's the wind. Nothing else, she whispered to herself. But then the voice came again, clearer this time, softer, almost pleading. Sarah, help me. Her rational mind struggled against the terror curling through her chest. The bridge creaked behind her, though no one was there. A shadow flitted across the periphery of her flashlight's beam. She turned quickly, but there was nothing, only the swirling fog and the black river. The whispering grew louder. Not just one voice now, but dozens, overlapping, twisting together in unintelligible patterns. Some voices cried. Others laughed, their tones cold, mocking. The recorder in her hand began to emit static, then faint whispers that matched the voices she heard. Sarah tried to step back, but the bridge seemed longer than she remembered. The far side vanished into the fog, twisting impossibly, as if the bridge itself had become infinite. The whispers beckoned her forward, pulling at her mind, tugging at memories of her childhood, her lost friends, and her family. The voices knew her names, intimate details, fears. A figure emerged from the fog. Tall, impossibly thin, its body swaying as if carried by wind alone. Its face was hidden under a hood, but Sarah felt its gaze pierce her. It raised a hand, pointing toward the center of the bridge. Another whisper, insistent, carried in her mind. Step closer. Her legs moved against her will. She tried to resist, but the pull was irresistible. Each plank she stepped on moaned, though no wind blew. The river beneath reflected nothing but darkness, yet she swore she saw faces pressed against the water's surface. Mouths open in silent screams. A sudden gust swept across the bridge, knocking her off balance. She clutched the railing, only to feel icy fingers brush her arm, not human, not alive, yet real enough to make her scream. The hooded figure advanced silently, each step not making a sound on the wood. Sarah's flashlight flickered, and when it illuminated the figure again, she could see its face. No eyes, no mouth, only a smooth, pale void. Her recorder fell from trembling hands, rolling to the edge of the bridge. The whispers now became screams, echoing inside her skull, bending reality. Something moved beneath the bridge. The black water churned, rising in shapes like humanoid silhouettes, reaching for her. The hooded figure extended a hand toward the river. The silhouettes followed, stretching long, thin, ghostly arms upward, grasping, twisting in the fog. Panic surged. Sarah spun, trying to run, but the far side of the bridge seemed unreachable. The planks elongated, bending, forming shapes that should not exist: triangles, spirals, impossible angles. She felt herself being pulled forward, inexorably drawn toward the center, toward the river and the waiting shapes beneath it. Then, abruptly, the fog shifted, revealing a dim glow in the distance. A small cabin perched just beyond the edge of the bridge, lanterns flickering in the dark. She remembered the stories of the old caretaker who lived nearby, someone who could guide lost travelers away from the bridge's pull. With every ounce of strength, Sarah ran toward the light. The hooded figure tried to grab her, its void-like face inches from hers, whispering her name. Fingers of fog curled around her legs, dragging, pulling. She stumbled, fell, but rolled into the dirt path leading to the cabin. The caretaker, an old man with sharp, wary eyes, opened the door. Lantern in hand, he drew a circle around her, chanting something in a low, almost musical tone. The fog receded slightly, the whispers dying down to nothing. The bridge behind her seemed to pulse, alive with unseen energy, but she was safe. For now, breathing heavily, Sarah realized the truth. The bridge wasn't just haunted, it was sentient. It lured travelers, feeding off fear, and the whispers were the first step. A way to weaken the mind before the pull into the black river. And the hooded figure. She understood that it was the bridge's enforcer, guiding those who resisted. The caretaker spoke quietly. Leave before nightfall. Do not look back. Some things in Black Hollow want more than your fear. They want your soul. Sarah promised herself she would never return. But even after leaving the town, even in the safety of her apartment, the whispers followed her. Sometimes in the night, she could hear faint voices calling her name, soft as a breeze, pulling her toward an impossible bridge suspended in fog. And she knew the Black Hollow Bridge never forgets. Sarah barely slept that night. Every shadow in her apartment seemed alive, flickering across walls like the movement of unseen figures. The whispers that had haunted her on the bridge followed her, low, almost imperceptible at first, but growing steadily. Sarah, come back. She tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, imagination, paranoia. But even as she told herself this, she could feel the tugger pull in her chest, cold and insistent, drawing her toward a place she didn't want to return to. The next morning, Sarah received an email that made her blood run cold. It was a photo attachment taken from her own camera at the bridge. The image was blurred, distorted, but unmistakable. A pale figure, hooded and featureless, stood in the middle of the bridge. And in the fog around it, shapes, hundreds of shadowy faces pressed against the black water, mouths opening in silent screams. The email had no sender. She didn't recognize the sender address, but she recognized the handwriting of the message, a single line written in jagged, uneven font. The bridge remembers you. Panic took her over. She called the local authorities in Millersfield, but the town seemed to have dissolved into obscurity. The few residents who remained were tight-lipped, wary. You shouldn't have left the bridge alone, one old man said cryptically, his eyes darting nervously. Once it touches your mind, it waits, always. Sarah realized she needed more than logic or reason. She packed her recorder, camera, and flashlight and returned to Millersfield. The forest surrounding the bridge seemed darker than before, unnatural in its quiet, as if it had grown heavier while she was gone. Crossing the threshold into the Black Hollow, Sarah could already feel the pull again. The whispers, now many-layered, overlapping, calling not only her name but the names of her family, her childhood friends, each one distorted and twisted into mockery. The fog thickened as she neared the bridge. The black river churned with unnatural movement. as though alive. The hooded figure appeared almost immediately, gliding toward her without sound. Its void-like face reflected nothing, yet Sarah felt the weight of its gaze like a physical blow. Around it, the shadows of the lost travelers in the river surged upward, coalescing into human-like forms, faceless but recognizable in outline. She stumbled backward, falling to the bridge's wooden planks. Her recorder flew from her hands. The whispers became shrieks, invading her mind, each one clawing for her sanity. Suddenly, the bridge shuddered violently. The planks warped, bending in impossible shapes, forming spirals that led straight into the black river. The hooded figure raised a hand, and the water began to boil, thick shadows rising from its depths. Figures of past travelers emerged, hands outstretched, screaming silently. Sarah felt herself being pulled. The bridge seemed alive, twisting, lengthening, its center receding impossibly into the fog. The hooded figure advanced, and the whispers in her mind became one unified command. Step closer. Join us. Her instinct screamed to flee, but her feet moved of their own accord. Each step forward felt like centuries, the cold of the fog seeping into her bones. Shapes in the water mirrored her movements, reaching up, trying to touch her, trying to drag her into the black river dot. Then, a sudden flash of light, a lantern in the distance. The old caretaker appeared once again, standing firm at the edge of the bridge. "Sarah, step into the light," he yelled. She ran toward him, slipping over warped planks, branches lashing from the surrounding forest. Fog tendrils reached for her, cold and wet, wrapping around her arms and legs. The hooded figure screamed not a sound, but inside her mind a shriek that made her vision blurred. Sarah dove into the circle of lantern light. The fog recoiled violently, as though struck. Shadows dissolved, the river's surface stilled, and the hooded figure hovered at the edge, silent, watching, its void-like eyes burning into her soul. The caretaker grabbed her arm, guiding her to the cabin just beyond the bridge. "You survived," he said, voice calm but grave. "But the bridge remembers. It never lets go. It only waits for the next traveler, and you carry its mark." Sarah realized then that escape was temporary. Every bridge, every dark road, every whispering shadow could be a remnant of Black Hollow. And the hooded figure, the silent keeper of the bridge, was patient, immortal. Waiting, she stayed in the cabin overnight, safe within the circle of light. But even as she slept, she dreamt of the bridge, of the black water, of faceless hands reaching for her, of her name being whispered endlessly when she woke. The fog had lifted from the forest, the bridge appearing innocuous, just old wood spanning the black river. But Sarah knew the truth. Hollow, Black Hollow would wait, and it would call again. Even now, years later, she hears whispers on stormy nights, faint echoes that mimic voices she loves, drawing her attention to impossible places. And she knows, deep in her soul, the Black Hollow Bridge never forgets. No one who truly hears the whispers is ever free. Story 7. The Town That Watches You Sleep. The town of Greymore did not appear on most maps. It sat deep in a stretch of forgotten countryside, surrounded by forests so dense they blocked radio signals, cell service, and sometimes even sound. Travelers who passed too close often said the road bent without warning, pulling them toward Greymore, no matter how tightly they gripped the steering wheel. Locals called it coincidence. Survivors called it intentional. Evan Brooks arrived at Greymore just before sunset. He hadn't planned to stop. He was driving cross-state to clear his head after his sister's unexplained disappearance 6 months earlier. She'd been last seen near a place with no name on police records, just a note scribbled in her journal. "Everyone is watching. Don't fall asleep." When Evan's car began to sputter on the narrow road cutting through the forest, Graymore appeared ahead like it had been waiting. One street, one gas station, a few dimly lit houses pressed close together, windows glowing faintly in the twilight. The silence was immediate and oppressive. No birds, no wind, not even insects. The gas station attendant stared at Evan without blinking as he filled the tank. The man's smile never reached his eyes, passing through. The attendant asked. "Yeah," Evan said. "Just need fuel." The man nodded slowly. "Nobody ever passes through." Evan laughed awkwardly, but the attendant didn't. His eyes flicked toward the houses, then back. "If you stay," he added, "quieter now. Don't sleep tonight." Evan felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Why?" The attendant leaned closer. "Because that's when they watch." Before Evan could ask who they were, the man straightened and returned inside. Locking the door behind him, Evan told himself it was nothing. Small towns were strange. People liked messing with outsiders. But as he drove deeper into Graymore, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. Every house had curtains slightly parted, and behind every window, someone stood, men, women, children, all watching him pass, not moving, not blinking, just watching. He pulled into the only motel on the street, the Graymore Lodge. The sign flickered erratically, buzzing faintly, like it struggled to stay alive. Inside, the lobby smelled of dust and old fabric. The receptionist handed Evan a key without asking his name. "Room 6, she said. "You'll hear walking tonight. Don't open the door." Evan stared. "Walking?" She smiled thinly. "It's how the town checks on you." His room was clean, but wrong in ways he couldn't explain. The bed was positioned directly under a ceiling vent that exhaled cold air in slow, rhythmic bursts, almost like breathing. The mirror across from the bed reflected the room, slightly delayed when Evan raised his hand. His reflection followed a half-second later. He slept anyway. Exhaustion. That was his first mistake. He woke sometime after midnight to the sound of footsteps, slow, measured, deliberate. They came from the hallway. Outside his door, then stopped. Something scratched softly at the wood, not nails' fingertips. A whisper seeped through the cracks. Not one voice, but many layered together. "We see you." Evan froze, heart pounding. He remembered the receptionist's warning and stayed silent. The scratching continued, tracing the outline of the door frame, the handle, the PEEPHOLL. Then it moved away. Evan didn't sleep again. At dawn, the town looked normal to normal. Children played silently in the street. Neighbors stood in clusters, talking without sound, their mouths moving but producing nothing. Evan approached a woman standing outside her house, staring at the sky. "Excuse me," he said. "Can you tell me where I am exactly?" She turned slowly. Her eyes were bloodshot, ringed with dark circles. "Graymore," she said flatly. "How long have you lived here?" Her lips trembled. "I don't remember living anywhere else." A man nearby leaned closer, whispering urgently, "If you're new, don't let them see you dream." Evan frowned. "Who?" The man's expression shifted to terror. He backed away quickly. "You shouldn't ask questions while they're awake." Evan realized then that despite the daylight, the town felt alert, watching, as if something behind the buildings, behind the forest, was observing through borrowed eyes. That night, he barricaded his door. It didn't matter. The footsteps returned. This time inside the room, Evan lay paralyzed as shadows stretched across the walls, forming human shapes that didn't connect to anybody. The ceiling vent opened wider, exhaling freezing air. He felt pressure on his chest, invisible weight pinning him down. Above him, the shadows leaned closer. He heard his sister's voice. "Evan," it whispered softly, "they won't let me sleep." Tears streamed down his face as the shadows crowded in, their faces forming blank, smooth, featureless, watching, learning, memorizing. When morning came, Evan found a note carved into the wall beside his bed. Night 1, complete. Outside. Every resident of Greymore smiled at him, and none of them blinked. Asterisk. Evan stopped trying to measure time after the second night. The clocks in Greymore didn't move the way they should. Sometimes hours vanished. Sometimes seconds stretched until his thoughts felt thick and sluggish. He noticed the townspeople never checked the time. They didn't need to. The town knew. That night, Evan did not sleep. He sat upright on the bed, lights on, eyes burning, waiting for the footsteps. They came anyway, not from the hallway this time, from the walls. A slow, synchronized tapping echoed through the room, as if dozens of fingers pressed gently from the other side of the plaster. The shadows returned, but clearer, no more confident. They stood upright, no longer pretending to be formless. Their faces were still blank, but their heads tilted in curiosity, studying him like an insect pinned alive. "You're learning fast," a voice said. It wasn't his sister's voice this time. It wasn't anyone's. It spoke from everywhere at once: vent, walls, floor. Inside his skull, Evan screamed and lunged for the door. It opened easily. The hallway was full. Every resident of Greymore stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the exit. Their faces were calm, expectant. Their eyes reflected the same dull, pale glow, as if lit from behind. The receptionist stepped forward. "You weren't supposed to wake up this early." "What do you want from me?" Evan shouted. She smiled wider than a human mouth should. "Completion." They parted, allowing him to run. Evan burst into the street. Every house door opened at once. People emerged silently, joining the pursuit. Not running, just walking, certain he would tire. The forest loomed at the edge of town, its darkness thick and inviting. He reached it just as the ground beneath his feet shifted. The road curved inward, folding like flesh. The trees bent, forming arches that pulsed faintly, as if breathing. Evan collapsed, gasping, and the truth finally clawed its way into his mind. Greymore wasn't a town, it was a body. The buildings were cells. The people were nerves. And whatever watched through their eyes was something ancient that could not move on its own. So it learned people instead, wore them, slept through them, fed on dreams. The voice returned, softer now. "You carry grief, guilt, memory. These are rich." Evan was dragged not by hands, but by gravity itself toward the center of town. Beneath the motel, beneath the road, beneath the illusion. Something vast stirred. He saw it then. A colossal shape curled beneath Greymore like a sleeping god. Its surface smooth and pale, covered in countless eye-shaped impressions that opened and closed slowly. Veins of shadow connected it to every resident above. "You don't disappear," the voice explained. You are absorbed. Evan remembered his sister's journal. Don't fall asleep. He understood, too late. The townspeople gathered around him as the ground softened, pulling him downward. Their faces cracked, not breaking, but peeling, revealing the same blank surface beneath. You will help us watch, they whispered, as Evan was consumed. The creature shuddered in satisfaction. Above, the town reset. A new traveler's car sputtered on the road at sunset. Curtains parted, and Greymore waited, somewhere deep beneath the streets. Evan opened his eyes and began to watch. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Terror Mouth.